I'm trying to decide which graphics card to get for my little media HD PC that's going to be like a console killer sort of system. And I've looked at some lower spec graphics cards, like older graphics cards like a 1080 and an ARC A750. And while those are still relatively performant, I think for 2K to 4K gaming, you need something a bit more recent and a bit more powerful in terms of raw power, as well as recent technology, including things like ray tracing and upscaling and in this case, maybe not frame generation, but you know what I mean, just something that is a bit more modern, right? Something that came out in the last 10 years instead of the last 15 years. And so these are two other options that I'm looking at. And these are, of course, the 2080 Ti versus the 6700 XT from AMD. Now, both of these cards are, so to say, entry-level ray tracing cards. Of course, in the case of the 2080, it is the first foray into ray tracing from Nvidia, which means that you do get ray tracing, but you don't get all of the most recent sort of upgrades to the technology in terms of things like frame gen, which I believe is exclusive to Blackwell, fifth gen RTX cards. And some other types of upscalers. Same thing with the 6700 XT. While you do get some base level of frame generation, or not frame generation, but in their case, just upscaling technology, right? Whichever one you might choose, whichever one works best for your AMD card. The point is, it's not the newest stuff, but it is still usable stuff, is the point I'm trying to make. And with that said, let's take a look at how these cards perform at 1080p in modern games, games that came out in the last couple of years. And let's compare these two, and let's see if this is going to be a better fit for 2K to 4K gaming at 60 FPS with a remote console killer sort of gameplay, right? So let's take a look at how these do. First up, we do have Battlefield 6, and both of these are performing relatively well at 1080p. The 6700 XT is getting an average of 111 FPS, which is very respectable at 1080p high. It is a very smooth frame time graph, and then the 2080 Ti, which is a bit older, is getting 115 FPS average. Let's just go back there. And again, very, very smooth frame time. One thing that I didn't mention is the 2080 Ti is a 11 gig card in terms of VRAM, and the 6700 XT is a 12 gig card. So both are not the high end of VRAM these days, but enough to play any game at high settings at least. And it is not an 8 gig card at least. So it is good for middle of the road gaming in 2026. Moving on to the new Dying Light game, and the 6700 XT is getting 67 at 1080p high, not the best result. Average, and then the 2080 Ti is getting 90 FPS average. The 6700 XT is now at 75. So right now the 2080 Ti is doing quite well compared to the 6700 XT, which is actually surprised me a little bit. I thought the 6700 XT would be a bit more in line with the 2080 Ti. A game that's a bit more difficult to run, Doom the Dark Ages. Of course, you do have to have ray tracing to even play this game. The 6700 XT, 54 average right now, with a relatively smooth frame time graph, but maybe a slightly high. And then the 2080 Ti at 68 FPS average, with a 15 millisecond frame time graph. These are both at 1080p high. I would want to play at 1440p at least, which means that I would probably get in the 50s if I had the 2080 Ti and in the 40s if I have the 6700 XT. What's interesting about these cards in South Africa is that they are pretty much around the same price, which it's interesting if you look at it like this, right? Because the 2080 Ti is an older card, but the 6700 XT is apparently a worse performer. This is the first game where it's actually performed better. I think that's going to happen in some games, depending on the technology the game uses and, power draw and factors like those. But in terms of raw performance so far, the 2080 Ti is doing quite a bit better. In this game, Ghost of Tsushima, the 6700 XT is at around 88 average and the 2080 Ti is at around 85 average. Both very good results. Assassin's Creed Shadows, we are getting around 60 average for both. Again, the 6700 is in the lead for this one. Assassin's Creed Mirage, it's probably going to be similar. It's an older game, so higher FPS, but again, the 6700 XT is in the lead with this at around 120 FPS, and on the 2080 Ti we are looking at 115 FPS. Now here's one that I'm interested in, Spider-Man 2. Looks like we're getting around 57 on the 6700 XT and 66 on the 2080 Ti. It seems like a good result. I think you'll manage to get around 60 on 2K on the 2080 Ti, so that is interesting. Indiana Jones, another game that you do have to have ray tracing to play, and it's getting around 68 on the 6700 XT and around 77 on the 2080 Ti. 1080p high, interesting to me because it's a very modern game, very recent game, and both of these are doing relatively well. It's a good result for both. The newest Horizon Forbidden West game, it's very similar here at 75 and 77 FPS average. 1080p very high. This is something that I will be playing on the computer that I want to get this card for, whichever one I choose. So it's interesting to see that at 1080p it runs at about 75 FPS. Let's look at one last one. I think we'll do Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk on the 6700 XT system is getting around an average of around 88, and on the 2080 Ti system around 106. Okay, let's talk about it a bit. Interesting results. The 6700 XT has an extra 1 gig of VRAM, but overall it seems to have been the worst performer, which has surprised me a bit. I think the 2080 Ti probably falls between the 6700 XT and a 6800 XT. So the 6800 XT, of course, is a 16 gigabyte card, and you would probably compare that to a 3080 or maybe a 3070. But in this case, both of these cards seem to be good performers. Now, they do seem to be sort of the high end of HD performers rather than the mid-spec 2K performers, right? But I do think you could compare something like a RX6700XT to these, and they would probably be quite similar. The interesting thing is, of course, the pricing. So in South Africa, the 6700 XT used is around, if you're lucky, you could get one for around 4,500 Rand, which is around $330, $340. The 2080 Ti you could get for around 4,500 to 5,000 Rand, but they are relatively scarce and difficult to find. The 6700, on the other hand, is very easy to find, especially secondhand. So the question then becomes, the RX6700XT new is 5,500 Rand, which is only about $40, $45 more than these cards used. So the question becomes, probably slightly less performance, but also 12 gigs of VRAM and a warranty, versus older cards older technology, but better raw performance? And I think these are the questions that, if you're shopping for a GPU, you just have to answer yourself. It is what it is. It just depends on what you want to get out of your system. For my use case, I feel like the 2080 Ti has probably shown more towards what I would need, because I would be looking at 2K 60 FPS average, and I think the 2080 Ti is going to get very close in most games, even apparently Spider-Man 2, and in something like Cyberpunk it does very well. So the 2080 Ti is a clear winner for me, in this one at least. It's been very interesting to see. These are sort of like my mid-spec picks for what I would want to spend. Next up, I'll look at some slightly more expensive cards, maybe something like a 6800XT versus a 3080 or something like that. But point being, for these ones, I am leaning towards the 2080 Ti overall so far. I think the 2080 Ti is a very good value spot at around 4,500 Rand, at around 320, $330. I think that is something that I could probably go for and be happy with the performance that it gives me. It's been interesting to see. It's interesting how well it still does, and I could definitely game with it in 2026. Like I said, next one's going to be similar but slightly more expensive cards, so stick around for that. Thanks for watching this one. Let me know what you would choose. Is 1 gig more VRAM more valuable than better pure performance? And of course some newer technologies. Which one would you go for? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.